Hello and welcome back to the course on blockchain. And today we're going to talk about initial coin offerings, otherwise known as ICOs. So let's have a look. In our layers of blockchain, an ICO can actually happen on two different layers. Most commonly what we see is ICOs happening on the token layer, where either under Ethereum or Neo or another protocol, somebody creates a new idea or has an idea how to use blockchain in an industry or in a different way, and they then use blockchain to, or use an ICO to fund this idea, and that's on the token layer. And at the same time, an ICO can also happen on the protocol or coin layer, where if somebody comes up with a new protocol for blockchain, then they can create it and they can issue the coins that are going to be in that protocol in an ICO. So that's just something to keep in mind, to remember, but most commonly you're going to be dealing with, or you're going to be hearing about ICOs of tokens. Alright, so let's have a look at how ICOs actually work. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to compare IPOs to ICOs. An IPO is an initial public offering, and it's a way that companies are or have been historically used to raising money from the stock market. So let's have a look. This is an IPO. And how does it work? Well, let's say these three gentlemen, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne, wants to raise some money for their company, Apple, right? So how does this whole thing work out? Well, at the start, they put in work, let's say their labor, and some initial capital into the company before any IPO is even considered yet. Into this idea, they're putting work and initial capital, and in return, they get shares in that company. Then what happens is they start producing products, computers, phones, watches, and so on, and other products. And basically, so the company creates products and services, and in return, it gets a profit. So that's how a company can operate before it's publicly a listed company, when it's a private company. But then once they want to list the company publicly, so the shares are available to the general public for purchase, they conduct an IPO, an initial public offering. And what happens there is the public gives cash to the company and in return gets shares in that company. And so that way it's a way that companies raise cash in order to fund their operations further. So once they know that the idea is working and is showing promise, they need a lot of capital in order to grow and scale their business. That's how they raise cash. But in return, they have to give shares to the community, to the people that backed it, or the people that invested into the company. And therefore, these people are actually entitled to a part of the company, even though it's very small for every single individual person, or might be quite large for larger investors such as companies. So companies can also invest into different companies or investment funds. So with that entitlement to part of the company, what comes also is some control, and also what comes is some share of profit. So if the founders or the people over here, they want to pay themselves a part of the profit, now they can't just pay themselves, they have to pay shares to the public. That's just like a very basic overview. It's of course much more complex than that, but in general, this is kind of the idea behind an IPO. Now let's have a look at an ICO. What happens there? Well, the start is very similar. So the founders, they create a company. Let's say this is happening in a parallel universe, so that these companies are not related, don't even exist in the same world. And so the founders create a company, they invest their work or labor and initial capital, they get shares, they create products and services which generate profit, and then at some point they decide that they want to raise some more capital, they need more money to scale their idea, to scale their business. And so in this case, what they would do is they would put their products and services into an enclosed environment, so to say, and they would say, okay, so from now on, we're going to introduce a coin called, let's say, the Apple coin, or to be entirely correct, it's not a coin, it's a token, right? And unless they create their own protocol, then it will be a coin. But if they're creating just a ICO in the third layer, then it would be a token. So the Apple token, which you can use to buy our products, to get our services, and so on. And you can always exchange US dollars for Apple tokens. You can still buy our products and services with US dollars, but it'll be more expensive. So it's better off to have Apple tokens, and that's going to be like the fuel of our economy within our company. We're going to create this little economy of our own where people with Apple tokens are going to be able to buy our products and services and so on and so on. And so basically the public already knows that this company is quite successful. The idea is great. And so they see the value in having these Apple tokens. And so what they're going to do is now they're going to invest money into these Apple tokens in an ICO. As soon as these coins or tokens are initially offered, public is going to give the company cash, or which usually happens in Bitcoin or Ether, in the current ICOs that we're seeing. And in return, they will get tokens. And so we'll talk more about this further in the ICO case study tutorial. But for now, the important thing to understand is the conceptual difference. And the difference is that in the case of an IPO, in the traditional approach, the public gets shares and control and entitlement to a share of the profit of the company. Whereas in an ICO, the public gets none of that. The public just gets these tokens that they can later on spend on the products of the company and services, or they can instead later wait for these tokens to appreciate in value and sell them off more at a higher price. What is important here is that the founders of the company, they keep all the control of the company, and they keep all the shares of the profit. So that's an important part to remember here. And other comments here are that IPOs, they go through a very stringent legal process. It's very hard to do an IPO. Lots of lawyers have to be involved. It's very costly. It's very rigorously audited and controlled by the government, whereas ICOs currently are not, or not yet. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, that while an IPO is limited to only companies that are ready to take the next step and start scaling and are ready to be publicly listed, an ICO can be done by anybody, literally anybody. We'll see examples of that further down as well in this course. So that's something else to keep in mind. So we go that an ICO is just another way for a company to raise money, in order to fund its operations further. And if you'd like to learn a bit more about ICOs, then there's a great article on TechCrunch. It's called WTF is an ICO by Alex Willem. So check it out, and if in there you might find some additional information on ICOs. And on that note, we're going to wrap up today's tutorial. I look forward to seeing you in the next one, where we're going to continue this journey into the world of initial coin offerings. Until then, enjoy blockchains.